This poem is called Remember. Hands in pockets, feet ever moving. Such is the way a cold world is treaded on, grooving. You come from heavy lineage. Eyes sharp, look up. Easy to get lost. Sit down, start reading. The solace of page corners under LED lights of academia is where you'll find safety. Swallow pride, stay grounded. Funny how ground catches up to all things, but it was they who built from the ground up. It's up to you to remember. Stay humble, remain modest. Why? When you know that ancestors had to hide themselves, banished from what they built. But how will you know? You must remember. History of exclusion, ages of silence. Sweat is what runs in these rivers, makes them strong. Your birthright is to be strong, to endure. Not on 1 month, but every single month. When headspace fills with storm clouds, electric energy coursing through limbs, remember their names.
So, although Daniel could not be here with us this afternoon because he had to work, we are really excited that he was able to share that with the event. And yeah, that was really great. And so we'll give Daniel a virtual thank you. And moving on to introducing our guest speaker. Dr. Pierce Gordon has become one of a design colleague of mine, a virtual friend. I also see that Dr. Leslie Ann Noel is here, who was our keynote speaker last year. And Dr. Gordon is joining the now ranks of being a keynote speaker for Spotlight on Black Designers at DePaul University. Dr. Gordon is an innovation catalyst, a researcher, a facilitator, an evaluator, impassioned by the space between transformation and liberation. As the director of Equity Innovation Studio at the Think Rubiks, a Black-led social innovation consultancy, Dr. Gordon serves as a researcher, facilitator, evaluator, and change catalyst that uses equity innovation to shape our collective future. He's taught courses in design, evaluation, international development, and equity across 4 different continents, count them 4. He has co-designed partnerships, products, and services with local and international change makers to support social change and research the complexity, evaluation, and emergence of design and innovation across the world. I just want to say that I've had the opportunity to read Dr. Gordon's pieces. If you're not familiar, check him out. His Medium page is constantly updated just with thinking about the larger global context of design in our world, how it relates to society and politics and just, the movement of every day. So I'm really honored to welcome Dr. Pierce Gordon to the floor. Thank you.
You make me feel so welcome. Hi, everybody. How we doing? How we feeling? We okay? First of all, before I get started, I got to say hello to my homies. Dr. Leslie Ann Noel, what's good? Christina Harrington, thanks for having me here. Who else is here? Mark Weiner on Twitter, what's happening? How you doing? I'm just trying to see if I can catch anybody else. Truetso, what's going on, folk? I appreciate you. SL Rao, what's up? I'm so appreciative of having the space to speak a little bit about my story, about some of the work that I've been blessed to be a channel for. And hopefully I don't want for my conversation to take up too much time because I'm always appreciative. Oh, Sarah, hey, Sarah, how you doing? Sorry, my apologies. I gotta say hi to everybody. Let me back up. To be a channel for the work that I've been very, very privileged to be able to deliver to the world. And also, I hope to have a sufficient time to have a conversation with the communities that are on the call about if any of the insights that I'm bringing up, bring up questions, bring up concepts, bring up ideas, not only so that I can give you all sage on a stage style, this is what you should know to do equity and innovation right, but so we can collectively build up the larger community as to why we can all do our practice better every single day. So I'm very appreciative to be here. We might as well get started. Let's go down for it. So I'm gonna share my screen. Can you all see my screen? I'm looking for any yeses.
Yes.
Good, yeah, nice, beautiful. I'm going to present. So first thing I'm gonna do is throw y'all for an audible. The title that I originally put on represents a version of this talk that I have since evolved out of. So you all are getting a new version because I believe that you deserve better. So what I'm going to do is talk a little bit more, not only about the intersections between innovation and equity, but how that also has intersected with some of the work that I've accomplished personally while building up towards my research, also in international development and evaluation as well. So we're going to be not only discussing about equity in design, but redefining innovation as a concept. And hopefully, I'm going to put my thoughts out there on Front Street, and they will not be taken as fact, as law, as authority, but they inspire opportunities for you all to consider what else we should redefine in our own collective worlds. Let's get started. First of all, I want to check in. How are you doing? Personally, seriously, wholeheartedly. It is old hat to describe the collective apocalypse that we are currently experiencing as unprecedented. But in all of the conversations that I've had with so many different stakeholders, friends, colleagues, strangers, and the like, I'm always appreciative when they hold space for me to talk about what my life has been like. And I just wanted to hold that space for you. I wanted to be respectful for all of the resources that we have used for us to be able to be here, the water, the air, the physics that involves. I want to be respectful of the lands that we all sit on. I'm currently speaking to you from Gaborone, Botswana. So very much so involved with the Botswana people and the indigenous San lands that I currently sit on. So I want to respect that and move with that consideration as we do better work to recognize how we can reimagine and shape and redesign our worlds that we're a part of. So first thing I wanted to do was introduce with a personal story. One of the first stories that I realized really resonated with me about what it meant to feel something innovative. What you see here is me 13, 12 years ago. I'm old, long ago. You actually see me as the section leader of the Morehouse College House of Funk drumline, the marching band. By that time, I had already marched 3 separate seasons. And the reason why I was so excited about being a part of this process is because about 5 years before that, I was completely inspired and changed by a particular movie that some of y'all might know. It's called Drumline. I had been playing for my entire life since 4th grade. And I was in jazz band, I was in concert band, I was in marching band at my high school, and I didn't even realize there was a possibility that I could be in a place like that. Being in show bands, marching for Mardi Gras parade twice in a row, and building connections with Black brothers and sisters to create a collective music experience that I would never forget. The reason why I wanted to hit on this particular issue is because coming up to it, it was one of my greatest accomplishments that I loved discussing all the time. But today, I look back on that with a bit more of a critical lens, particularly understanding how, not just how the music was created, but how the organization of these paramilitary institutions operate in the world. I was so used to a certain type of cultural experience from being a part of a person who was extremely good at practicing school, who knew how to stay in line, do what I needed to do to move forward and to play my part as a quote unquote ant collecting the colony, that I didn't know that there was another way to adapt and live and evolve past that. And reflecting on that in where I am now made me deeply appreciate how I am trying to refine my relationship with the beauty of my first design craft, which is, as you can tell, drumming. And it represents a microcosm of my relationship with design and the things that are important about expanding my world past the way where it already is. So past this, lifetimes of different experiences occurred. And the next story I'd like you all to learn more about me is what I call my gold star experience. Gold star because it checks a lot of the check boxes for people to recognize this is why you should listen to me as a quote unquote expert designer. So when I started doing work in Botswana in 2016, I was just finishing my qualifying exam, if people know what that means for their PhD. I just finished it and I just started into field work in the Kalahari Desert with a program called the International Development Design Summit. This at the time had ran, I believe it's 10th or 11th international summit held all across the world, 60 separate people from 25 separate countries with, I would say, half, maybe a third of the community from this indigenous community that we were working with in a location called Dakar on 6 separate projects, working on co-design interventions that would help this indigenous community better live their lives. As you can tell from this picture that keeps looping over and over, my particular project was the deep sand wheelchair. It was a great co-design experience for 4 weeks, 8 a.m. to 10 p.m., full bids of designing, from researching what the particular communities need, from understanding and redefining what we're actually addressing, from developing the metrics, from understanding the physics, to molding, to profiling what we were creating at the time. Just, it was from soup to nuts. I have not personally heard a single development-centered co-design intervention as well designed as this one, which is part of the reason why I wanted to engage in the first place. And at the end of the prototype, unbeknownst to the current wheelchair experts that we were working alongside, was completely different than other people had come up with in the first place. So that seemed like a success. But it really made me think, expanding into a longer research experience that was 2 years long, learning about the Botswana innovation ecosystem. It made me really dive into this one question that I think is gonna help navigate the first piece of this presentation. It was, how do you define innovation? On my Medium article, that's one of the, on my Medium page, that's one of the pieces that I'm most proud of, particularly because of what you're about to hear, especially recognizing all of the different ways that innovation intersected in this one context, and that I take with myself in all work that I do. So clearly, design and innovation are very similar, yet different and intersecting fields in many ways. And one of the main contributions of my first parts of research is recognizing on a global scale some of the first strong theoretical motivators of what innovation meant, developed by an economist, a philosopher named Joseph Schumpeter. I hope I'm getting his name correctly. Please don't come after me if I didn't say his name correct. One of the big points, he's written a huge amount of resources and assets that you could dive in. People have written papers on his concepts. One of the main points that I wanted you to hit on is that at its core, his definition, his purpose of innovation is an evolutionary process that constantly goes through a process of creative destruction. From his representation, innovation on the macroeconomic level represents the purpose for economic development in the first place. So the creation of new services, products, organizations, institutions, and the like, they reshift the supply-demand relationships between communities to a different equilibrium, creating a new normal that people are recognizing. This is something that you're likely to see, that we have been seeing accelerated since we have been alive, definitely in the internet age and the like. But the main purpose, the main incentive from the way that he describes it from an economic perspective is to create rent for the interventions that you're constructing. Rent meaning, for instance, if you have intellectual property and you want to gain royalties on the things that you're constructing, to create a foundation of, and similar, like you'll have some sort of land that you own and you try to gain assets, resources, and the like based on the owning of that land. That is the purpose for how he determines how he believes that innovation should push society forward. The reason why this really intersected with my own personal research was because I came to this near the end of my relationship. The main I was asking when doing my research was, how do innovators evaluate? So interesting, because the process of creating something new seems like a paradox with traditional evaluation methodologies that assume that you need to have a comparison with the things that currently exist. But how do you do so when things don't exist? So that was the question that I wanted to ask any stakeholder in the innovation community here in Botswana, from the national level to different organizations that existed, from organizations at the bottom. And I realized that the core of all the activities that they engage in, the laws that they constructed, how they decided to determine whether or not innovation occurred, was Joseph Schumpeter's theories. So there's something called an Oslo manual, that's the guidelines for collecting, reporting, and using data on innovation, that at its core made differentiations between whether or not the type of innovation it is, whether it's a service, it's organizational, or it's a product, and the level of innovation, which essentially aligns to how much of the market is affected by what's actually occurring. And as you might expect, the larger the effect, if it's local or if it's global, then the larger the impact, and thus the more valuable the innovation. So I reflected on this reality, this one definition of how and why innovation is community. And I realized from my own work potential consequences of that activity. So this is one part of the critique from me doing this particular project. But for 3 weeks, we created this wheelchair. It looked cute. Everyone loved it. You had nice little videos of San children playing on it when people were enjoying themselves during this event. And then for the next week, we had to decide what we were going to do with this intervention. And we decided at its core that it made no sense to keep the wheelchair in the community. And the difficulty, there were multiple sides of this. At its core, the frustrating reality we recognize is this thing is a prototype, and creating it in a way that made it seem like it was usable is actually an ethical no-no. because if we kept it there and people decided to use it, then they could get hurt 2, 3, 10 years down the line, because of the many stringent requirements of doing wheelchair engineering. Additionally, this community is 40 kilometers away from the closest town, which is very, very far away from the main hospital and many other institutions. If you've ever done international development work, the word institutional voids comes to mind. There were many disconnections of the institutions that would make this thing be able to be repaired and useful and assisting and potentially recreated by others, but also to be able to engineer it into something that was technologically ready, required expertise, required engineering capacity, required resources to test and iterate, that this community did not have access to. So we created the thing. There was a lot of interest and value in what we constructed, but at its core, to make it better, it had to leave its location, which reflected for me, not just for me, but for the community on, well, then what are we leaving to make sure that this community actually gets something out of this endeavor? So I'm going to come back on that concept in a little bit about understanding how designers do this type of work. But it made me reflect in the point right now about how innovation is translating in the country, what it means to do something innovative here. So the two official languages are English and Setswana in Botswana. And whenever you bring up innovation for the presentation that I have given, they give two different words that traditionally mean innovation. Bonokopila, which means excellence, and Maranyane, which means technology. But they don't quite mean innovation though. They don't exactly, whenever I've had this conversation, it turns into a debate, a dialogue about which word should we use? Which way do we define it? People are like, well, why don't we just use English? Because that has the definition that matters here. And I think that main concept matters in this conversation because of an idea called linguistic relativity. During interviews in the country, I had the opportunity to connect with a University of Botswana professor that talked about this difficulty of communities that have created, like any community has, a collective intelligence based on the language that they are trained, that they create for themselves. A perfect example of this, it's difficult to find and define innovation, but in Botswana, which has a deep culture in respecting and utilizing cattle, you can name 400 separate colors in Setswana, over 400 for different colors of cows. So the reality is that what we speak on affects what we have the ability to communicate. You'll see this trend in a little bit in the future. Additionally, there's more. Let's keep critiquing the stuff that I've done in the past. I love doing that. So during this entire process, after I did the work, I had the blessing for the next 2 years to conduct research into the history of this community, into the context of systems that help support innovation as Botswana's tradition outside of its current traditional economic mainstays, which is diamonds and tourism. It's very likely that if you own a diamond, it might be from Botswana. But recognizing this made me interact deeply with the different institutions that are incentivized to do innovation in the first place. And what I mean is one of the main reasons why one community in Botswana tries to do innovation in so many ways, shapes, and forms is because innovation has hurt them in the past. It's not one of the main points of conversations. It takes time and conversation and trust to be able to surface these ideas. But the main point that came up constantly is the stealing of intellectual property. So it wasn't technically wholeheartedly legally stealing, but it's stealing nonetheless. The perfect example that they consistently talk about is something called sengaparile, which is devil's claw. I'm not sure if I've seen a lot of it in the US, but it definitely is around the UK. It definitely is around Europe. It definitely is in South Africa and many other places. It's an herb that is made in Southern Africa by the San, the communities that we worked alongside with, that in the late 60s was seen by German scientists and taken back to Germany to do studies on, to research, and to create IP on, that generations later is sold back to Botswana and a litany of other places, with an entire industrial system constructed to try and harvest, develop, and sell back this very useful plant with very little benefit for the people that had been creating it for years. This is one example of many. And in these conversations, this is in direct conflict with the definitions of innovation that we have established before, the institutions that we have constructed that represent a utilitarian perspective on what it means to do good in the world. If it's larger and more impactful and it changes the markets towards a different equilibrium, then it is innovative. Be damned the communities that had the interventions, the knowledge, the lived expertise on how to support these communities in the first place. Which is why I was so appreciative when we had these conversations with colleagues in the country on how they define innovation. They use a language, there's many different sound communities. I'm not an expert on the litany of different experiences they've had, but in this community that spoke, they use the word sonkori to be similar to innovation, which means dreams. Just in case you're knowing, who, that phrase right there, which I bastardized, means innovation center in Naro, if you're wondering exactly what that meant. That is the makerspace that was constructed that we did a lot of the work inside. I talked a lot about that story. You might be asking who I am and what I'm doing here in the first place in front of you. So what I like to say is I navigate the space between transformation and liberation in a lot of my work. I think a lot. I do this research at the intersection of innovation practice, evaluation capacity building, and international development and equity. And I'm here to talk a little bit more about some of the things that I've accomplished and what I believe it means about how we should reshape our world. So for instance, I've been a part in Botswana of, after this research, Botswana's first policy hackathon, done some social analyses of human-centered design for development for my own dissertation, done design research work in Auckland, adding to and critiquing existing innovation methodologies and supporting community entrepreneurial interventions all across Botswana and the rest of the United States. I also served as the inaugural innovation fellow at the Arkansas Regional Innovation Hub, where we developed a pop-up innovation hub in Northwest Arkansas to support the Marshallese, the Latinx, and the Black communities in recognizing, understanding the value of a space, of a community-oriented space pre-COVID, to help communities support their collective entrepreneurial, artistic, and STEM-related aims. I'm blessed to have started. Unfortunately, I haven't had a chance to do a lot of work with them, but I just want you to know about them as well. The Community Reflex Design Collective, that was the incentive, that was the seed to the work that you're going to be hearing for the rest of this discussion, that discusses innovation on the ground, recognizing equity design, and evolving the more work that we're continuing to do all across the world. So I wanted to hit on those points of recognizing all these definitions of innovation to discuss why design has a unique place in recognizing innovation, while simultaneously expanding and reframing what it means to do this design work. Some of the folks that are on this call that I shouted out, you might see your faces, you might see your names. I didn't know you were coming. I'm appreciative that I can shout out these assets for the future, but I hope that some of the insights will be valuable and useful moving forward. What I appreciate about the world of design is that it has made, democratized, personally, the process of creating the future, purposefully creating the future. There are many people that don't call themselves designers. There are many communities that take different definitions of what it means to do design. I know I have my own personal ones that I use as working definitions, but what I'm appreciative of in these conversations is recognizing that there are so many different definitions that sit together to create our collective field, and they are all, in and of themselves, understanding that people that do call themselves designers hold valuable resources to purposefully construct a future that hasn't existed yet. If that's dealing with social design, co-design, if that's dealing with products, services, environments, policies, what have you. We all use design in different and unique ways, which is why I'm glad I get to connect with you to redefine what it actually means. I think one of the most valuable assets in the human-centered design debate I have personally come across, I came across a couple of months ago from a online open source class taught by Ahmed Ansari, a New York professor, class called Modernity and Coloniality. You're about to see why I love this thing so much. Designers love maps. Designers love visualizations of how the world works, which is why I love this map to represent a reality of the world and how it evolved. So as you can see, old trade routes post a particular time you're about to hear about of what the world used to look like. As you can tell, there's Middle East, there's South Asian, there's China over there a little bit. Each one of these circles that you see, circuits, represent entire civilizations, as you might say, entire universes of experience. I'm not only talking about culture, I'm talking about relationships of labor, I'm talking about different artifacts that people construct, I'm talking about political systems that were entirely different from each other, that interacted with each other completely separate ways than we see today. So in these environments, where innovation actually occurred was at the intersections of these cultural circuits where people could engage in trade, engage in knowledge and information sharing and synthesis and the like. And a litany of these experiences were, in many ways, how the world looked before mercantilism and colonialism. This is a map after all of that occurred. And there's a litany of historical experiences that I am, again, a full expert. That is why I lean on expertise like world systems theory to discuss the reality of how this world that we currently live in became what it is. And it's hard to name a particular individual culprit because so much of the world was involved in this, but you can land on Portuguese and the Spanish that started the conversations towards taking conquistadores, sending them to the Americas and the like, and doing all forms of a unique type of exploitation and codifying them into systems that we continue to see today. At its core, it created a system of exploitation made particularly for the crown, the center, that was uniquely used to exploit all forms of the periphery, whether they are resources, whether they are trade lines, whether they are people, and systematically constructed a structure of race made to support that system that, if you haven't noticed, we see up until today. There have been many evolutions. There have been many other culprits, many other collateral of those types of consequences. But at its core, the thing that I want you to remember is that this change, this shift, had not been seen before and created a single universe of center and periphery, where so many different ways that we currently see today, there was codified a hierarchical value of how the world, quote unquote, does exist and or should exist, from who's on the higher or the lower for class, with the International Organization and Division of Labor of resources, from political and economic institutional structures. I assume everyone on this call can read. I hope that's the case. But there's a litany of different reasons and examples of these centers and the peripheries that we currently exist in, that human-centered design also builds and evolves from. And also that design as a whole, as a larger concept, it builds from an aesthetic hierarchy of high art and low art, and a pedagogical hierarchy of Western school university systems are considered superior over non-Western forms of systems. What I took, there's a litany of experiences, but what I personally took from this recognition is simultaneously all of the different ways that centers and peripheries manifest in my own life and in the lives of the systems that I inhabit and study and subvert, but also the recognition that in many of these spaces, the excess of what's happening because of systems, whether or not the systems are thriving or destroying themselves, as we might see over the past 10, 20, 100 years, are the people at the peripheries of those systems in all of these ways. I love this tweet. I think it's very representative of a redefining of human center, of what it means to center the human. I wanted you all to see it. We're going to keep moving. In recognizing this, there's a litany of ways that I appreciated from that core that design can spread the collateral of oppression. Many other ways that designers have spread oppression before and after this, but recognizing that there was a beginning of this might also recognize that there might be an end. So in previous talks, I've talked about the past of designs, how design spread the collateral of oppression based on how we relate to the past. And this is related through the things that designers have constructed. So these are artifacts, these are policies, these are urban planning cities, these are apps that use, for instance, Bitcoin and Ethereum and the like. So if we are successful as designers, our creations have a life past what we constructed. However, very rarely do designers have the opportunity to understand how their creations intersect with those systems of power and oppression. So I navigated this in my talk, not on my talk, but my Medium post called 100 Racist Designs, and came up with a lot of different examples and ideas of how design definitely across the world has perpetuated racism. There are many examples. The optical heart rate monitor, for instance, built on reality that the monitor's physical system is trained to see Black skin less easily than white skin. Another example that I deeply appreciated knowing the history of and how this intersected is the server tipping system. Many people eating through Uber Eats and Instacart and the like, while recognizing that today people are not tipped enough, and it creates so many forms of it recreates economic inequality. But the history, did you all know that the history of the tipping system was created literally because of racism? It was because after the Civil War, white people did not employ Black folks in any other positions other than service jobs. So in creating those types of jobs, they created the laws and the systems that did not pay them equitably, that then those laws were never updated, and actually codified into law by, get this, Herman Cain. You should look it up. I believe it was 1989. One other example that I really appreciated learning about was the speech recognition technology. Be it Siri, be it dictation modes on your laptop for accessibility. One of the many different confluences of history that built up that, one big reality is recognizing both in computers and across cultural experiences what type of speech is determined correct. And that type of speech was actually constructed in the mid-30s, especially American considered speech, because of a speech coach that literally created a dialect there because he thought this is how people wanted to hear speech being told on the radio and during movies. If you want to hear more about that, go to the blog post and you'll see exactly about who and towards what ends that speech recognition was created, that then evolved into the technology that we use every single day. This also affects how we design today. In the present, the actual work that we do. So most people on this call, when we do this design work, it's not just the things that we create, but it's the process of design that we engage in. So it's also the capacities that we have as designers to construct the possibilities, the artifacts that we consider to be important. So it's not just the capacities, the tools, the resources, but how we leverage and use power to be able to create those things. What I appreciated in having this conversation with colleagues was recognizing the one main ontological belief, one main ontology of how designers see their world. And one metaphor I like to use that is many designers see their world as kind of like gods of the watchmaking god, the deity that creates something and says, now the world is perfect, go forth and do what you need to do. And the main critique in recognizing that is that is very much so governance and policy thinking without understanding how people can adapt and evolve once those policies are constructed. Yes, much of design is intersected with psychology, understanding how people adapt and evolve and move, but so much of our own design works and decisions clearly have been inadequate based on the many different collateral damages our designs have constructed because we don't fully understand the psychology, the sociology, and the history of how humans interact with things. This also, though, affects the future. This affects the things that we believe to be possible, how we imagine the world what to be. And the biggest thing that came to mind about how to break us out of that cycle is to listen to Black women. Listen to Black women. Listen to Black women. Particularly, a great place to start, if you haven't had a chance to read it yet, is listen to Octavia Butler. There are many different examples of the different apocalypses that we have personally experienced, from 1984 to Dune and a litany of other experiences. But one might say Parable of the Sower got it pretty damn close in the work that you're trying to engage in. I'm not going to ruin it for you. All I'm going to say is trust Lauren in everything she's doing. What I personally appreciated, oh no, what you're supposed to see here is a working GIF of N.K. Jemisin giving a talk, particularly on a topic I think every designer should engage in work: world building. So N.K. Jemisin is a famous Black author that has created the Broken Earth trilogy and one of my favorite collections of short stories called, oh my goodness, it's called Who's Afraid of Black Future Month? Something exactly like that. I'm gonna get the exact name for you in a bit. But what she has done consistently is given talks at different on different podcasts, at different schools, at different conferences about what she has to go through to understand how to create a brand new world, a fantasy world. And in doing so, they do things like, okay, we're dealing with the earth. That's cool. What if we made the earth, what if we made Pangea look like a pizza pie? What if we made it look like it was entirely iced over? How would the air work? How would the water work? How would societies evolve past that? What is the macro building? What is the micro building? What are the myths that people would construct spiritually, socially, institutionally, physically, technologically to survive that world? And how do we create a story out of it? Seems like that asset is immeasurably powerful for a discipline made particularly for redesigning and re-understanding how to create a new world. I'll leave that to you to learn more about. Of course, it comes up now. Great. I've never had a presentation where things went absolutely perfect. You see her talking very diligently about everything she's doing. So recognizing all these realities made me back up and understand one valid truth, one of the experiences that I personally had of when people ask me, what is innovation? I say it depends, because I love taking people on a ride. But more than that, I'm deeply appreciative of learning for them not only how their definitions reflect their values and vision for the future, because different definitions for different people mean different things. I like saying innovation is creating a new artifact that benefits a certain community. The question is, which artifact? How does it benefit? And which community do you personally care about? Which makes me deeply ask the question, what definition will you personally create in your own work that reflects innovation, that reflects your values? So in doing that type of work, that's why I've staked my ground in intersecting innovation, design, and equity in a litany of their different spaces and places. So a community I was blessed to be a part of from its inception is the Equity Design Collaborative, a community of people all over the US that center the power of communities historically impacted when doing their design practice, from Reflex Design Collective to Creative Reaction Lab to Beta Design to Design School X, a litany of my homies continuing to do this great work. Additionally, in the same vein, one of the first books that you should continue to read over and over and reflect on, I call it Instant Canon, was written by an MIT professor, Sasha Kostanchuk, that discusses from the perspectives of pedagogies, spaces, participatory natures, and two other categories that are leaving me, about how design justice can be enacted, separate from co-design, separate from inclusive design, a new field that recognizes the marginalized identities in reflecting how we do beneficial design work. Additionally, I've come across a litany of communities that are doing work specifically towards the idea of liberation, a level past, towards doing in the built environment with urban planners, with architects and the like, design particularly as an activist idea. In doing their work, they've come across and done a litany of knowledge resources and codifying different ways that people can engage in liberatory or justice or equity quality-based work, from reparations to representation to accountability, acknowledgement, in academics, specifically in academic spaces, specifically in design houses, and specifically in governmental institutions. If you go to designassprotest.com, you will be able to see their website and the litany of opportunities they have shown that all live in these specific spaces towards liberation. Also, let's talk about pluriversality. This wonderful individual who is continues to be a star. I believe you all might have heard of her before, speaking a litany about now, Leslie Ann, I don't want to get this fully wrong, so please correct me if I mistake a bit of this. Recognizing the value of redefining that original universal construction at near the beginning of this talk, instead of saying that there is one universe and way of thinking of the world and one way of designing how people should design in the world, which is reflected here in Botswana and a litany of other places. Instead, valuing, holding up, creating bridges between, and constructing a future of a world where many worlds fit. The idea, instead of focusing on equality where we all try to integrate into the same world, or liberation where we also try to reconstruct and redesign the systems that we all have to live in, creating a space where it is okay and all right that many of these worlds additionally fit and evolve and adapt and are designed together. What I deeply appreciate, what I deeply ask you to look for, and I'm going to give you the resources as well, is there's recently a book called the Pluriversal Dictionary, of a collection of examples of communities that are actively doing pluriversal work, sovereign-based, sustainable work that has lasted in some situations much, much longer than the current systems of oppression that we live in. So these people doing this work, it's great. These are people to lean on, to learn from, and to build from. We're examples of this type of work. There are many different instances that we can live on, and honestly, I'd love to hear from you all about different instances and examples of equity in design intersected. But some that came to mind. What if design were liberatory? This app is not up anymore, but when it was, I contributed as much as I could. Basically, like anybody uses right now, from Robinhood to Acorn and the like, you have a app that connects to your checking account and takes out a certain amount of money based on how much you pay. This is the same thing, except it pays bail funds. Unfortunately, it does not continue to exist, but I can't wait for somebody to have a similar example. Make the breast pump not suck. What if design was collaborative and building alongside communities at the margins to design their own realities? The creator of this movement recently graduated with a PhD, and I'm greatly appreciative of learning from not just the conference she constructed or the interventions that were movement that focused on design specifically focused towards gender, design particularly focused towards motherhood, towards identifying a new form of value for communities that need it. This one is near and dear to heart because it represents a community that I literally was 5 seconds near in my own personal work. I lived 4 blocks when I was in the Bay. I lived 4 blocks from this in Ashby, BART station. And I didn't have a chance to do too much inside this main building, but it is, I'm sad that I didn't, because it is an international example of accessibility design made to the max. It is a representation of Ed Roberts, an activist for the disability movement in the Berkeley area. They were known for, as you might know, an idea called the curb cut effect. This was popularized by these activists that wanted to get into Berkeley in different places, Berkeley's campus and a litany of other places, but could not access any of the areas. So literally at midnight, they went down into the street and poured cement and poured onto the areas to create their own ramps to be able to access buildings, spaces, cities, to be able to advocate for the needs of people that have different mobility issues. This was one example of a huge amount of interventions that was supported by Ed Roberts and a litany of other community activists that then evolved into the American Disabilities Acts in the 1990s. So this campus is a living testament to that type of work that has taken generations to evolve. So those are some examples. You might ask yourself, what about methods? What does it mean to do this type of work? Do I just do this for marginalized communities? Do I do design thinking for marginalized communities? Do I set up a hackathon to be able to do that? You might be problematic in some environments, but at least these are a few examples of some resources that might help you direct towards those things. Some things you might have seen in other situations, some things might be new. So what I personally appreciate, one example, I love participation in all of my work, but a participatory timeline, creating a collective understanding of the past, setting the first event on the timeline with the community that you're engaging with, marking important events, successes, failures, and areas of growth, and then building and growing over time as you have more people connecting and interacting with what has existed before and turning it into a collective memory. I love doing with the people that have the time to be able to do so is a systemic persona. Most people in this space have probably heard of persona as it's a nice story about somebody that you're trying, a beneficiary or a client or a customer or a user that you're trying to connect and learn more about to create something around, right? So why not, if you have a user, why not understand the systems that affect that user that you can integrate into the things you're trying to construct? So this includes political, environmental, social, institutional, technological, how this person navigates the world based on those systems. One of the examples of a systemic persona I created with RDC was during a project, a workshop. We created a particular case study of a community in West Oakland and asked them to create personas around environmental racism and how they have to navigate their life, about how they live and how they work and how they support their children based on which parts of the environment they have to interact with. So some examples for you. I love the Power Cube. I don't know who's heard of it. I would appreciate everyone that is doing any type of social design work to learn more about all of the ways that designers can methodologize power questions in the work they're trying to accomplish. And this is one example. So if you go to powercube.net, it represents 3 different frameworks for how power is created, from visible, hidden, and invisible, based on visible, like I'm telling you, you need to do X, Y, and Z, or invisible, where someone engages in an activity because the world says that that's what they're supposed to accomplish. From the spaces that power are manifested. A closed space is a dictator making decisions about how a country's economic structure should be created without the benefit of anybody else in the room. Invited example is, for instance, voting in the United States, depending on who can actually engage in voting and the like. And reclaimed spaces, a perfect example of that is activist environments, communities that have acquired a space towards putting pressure on a community to be able to make a certain decision about the world. And also levels, clearly local, national, and global, and noting how your practice, what you're doing in your work, and how what you're trying to do might shape the power dynamics that are affected in the work you're accomplishing. So research at its core, so much of it has a problem. This is another big thing, another big manifestation of the work that was in Botswana and so many other places in the US. But one big reality of this work is recognizing how community members are not respected for their expertise, their lived expertise, their identities, and creating a dynamic that ensures those communities are further respected in a way that builds on our collective knowledge of what we want to experience for the world. And a single way to do so, there's so many other things that need to be done, is redefining their role in the research instead of just acquiring it and using it for your own benefit as a design researcher or the like, creating a community relationship where they are part and parcel of that design experience, compensated for and respected as such. So this is another GIF of a fantastic essay that expanded my mind about music. So if you've all heard of Adam Neely, I still dive into the music world as much as I can every so often. What I'm appreciative of this YouTube essay and all the essays that he constructs is it combines my passion for the craft with my thirst for knowledge. And this essay doesn't just discuss all of the different ways that how Western music theory is permeated through society, but also all of the different frames and concepts and ideas that expand what we might mean when we're doing, when we're creating, when we're living this music. And I came across this video maybe 2 years ago. I put this into my presentation maybe about 5 days ago. And it represented a current representation of where I currently am in my work. There's so many possibilities out there of valuable, culturally different, epistemologically creative design and craft and solutions and ideas out there that exist in the world. And our worlds that we currently live in, me speaking English, me having a Berkeley PhD, me talking to you all here at DePaul University, represents a very, very small sliver that was considered, reconstructed to be the optimal existence of our world. And we have the opportunity in doing, in combining equity and innovation and liberation to create new things past that. What examples exist, what opportunities exist. Right now, I'm appreciative to be a channel of the value of this type of work, to try and learn about other communities that are creating other things that live new possibilities. At the same time that the pandemic is a portal, another big idea I take with myself in this work is you cannot construct what you cannot imagine. And broadening our imaginations is not just our job as educators, as researchers, as design professionals, but it is our imperative to get us out of the exploitative systems that we have constructed for our entire world, of which design is a small but very powerful part. So that's what we're dealing with. I got a lot of resources for y'all, some things that you should read, some assets that you should check out. That first thing on the top left, equity design resources, is an asset list that I've been collecting for maybe about 2 years, and I'm going to continue to collect. A lot of assets are on that thing. Design justice, as you can see at the bottom, is actually open source on certain parts of the internet. So if you go to the page, I think it goes to the open source version. Modernity and coloniality is also open source. I think it continues to be. Got some other communities, some resources that have been helpful for framing my thinking about doing this type of work. I wanted to hold some space for some reflection questions that I wanted you to hit on. Every single one of these that you see right here, and all of the links that I sent on, if you go to that link, bit.ly/lowercase consider equity, all of those resources are made available to you. So you can dive in, enjoy yourself, do your thing. But at the same time, I also want you to reflect on these questions to make sure that you can do the critical work that I did as much as I could for my own work, but I continue to do and work in the future. Additionally, I wanted to announce and be appreciative of that I found a space of Black social change makers that are looking to redefine and reconstruct what it means to do this equity innovation work. I'm currently the director. I just took the new task of being the director of the Equity Innovation Studio with Think Rubik's. So you can learn more about the work that we're doing at thinkrubix.com. I've already posted some assets on medium.com/thinkrubix, and you'll see more in that if you have communities that are interested in gaining guidance, increasing knowledge, supporting research, doing design strategy for organizations, for governance, for ecosystems that require equity-centered transformation, come to us and we'll help you alongside that to make that thing happen. And to learn more about our work, that's where you can find me and a lot of my stuff. So I'm greatly appreciative to say all that to you now. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Thank you so much, Pierce. I don't know how people have done this elsewhere, but if you are able to and have access to, throw up an emoji reaction to thank Dr. Gordon. And we want to open the floor for questions while we have time. And so if you have questions that you want to put in the chat, I've been monitoring. A couple of people have left some comments and resources, but if you have a question, we can kind of do it that way. I'll speak out the question just so everyone else can hear it, and then we can have Dr. Gordon to answer it. And while we're waiting for folks to pull together some of their questions, I can start. What do you feel like the future is for equity in design? And I know that oftentimes when we have these conversations for like this type of event, Spotlight on Black Designers, or where there are other designers of color that kind of speak to these topics, what is the role of like allyship when we're talking about kind of cultivating spaces, practices, and norms of design that are more equitable?
Hard questions. I love it. I'm gonna hit the first one first. It was, if I remember, what do I see the future is in this type of work? I think I bastardized the end of that question. In doing equity work in this type of field. I can say what I hope the future is and what I believe it might be. I think one of the biggest things I've been carrying with myself in this work is that the pandemic it is by another fantastic researcher named Ruha Benjamin. Check out Race After Technology, her book as well. The pandemic has navigated well-worn paths of inequity. There are so many examples for the people that have been paying attention. It's from who's been allowed to take off work, who's been allowed to work from home, who has internet access, who's been able to get the vaccine. Personally, one big example that comes to mind right now is the idea of vaccine apartheid. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's you all are getting vaccines right now. We don't have vaccines in Botswana at this moment. Botswana has cut off travel from the US, I think since yesterday or the day before. It's not just though health-based, it's economic, it's like who has gained an immeasurably large amount of money and who hasn't in these environments. And that is to say that I think it's very important to personally do a bit more rigor in the forecasting that will be necessary to be able to say these are things that I think are really valuable to look towards. But with that said, things have been moving towards inequity since before the pandemic. The pandemic has been a mirror and an accelerant for so many different examples of divides between communities that have and have not. And this, like many other designers, offers opportunity for communities that want to have specific instances of leveraged equity innovation. That's not a specific answer, but I think that means that there's more, much more that we can do to do this work. The second question about what is the role of allies in this type of work? Always complicated, always evolving and changing and adapting as the recognition for how the world is and how allies see themselves in this work is interesting. The reason why that's interesting for me is because in many ways, me being on this continent, I have to reconcile with the privileges that I have, the privileges I have being a US citizen, being someone with my accent, being someone with a PhD, and how I navigate in this space. In many spaces here, I am still, I call middle passage African for my work, but I have to be an ally for a litany of other experiences for people that don't understand international development dynamics. What does it mean? It means that in doing this type of work, I remember that this world that has been constructed, this universe, has not been here forever, but has been longer than any of our generations have been alive, for most of us can count back to. So recreating the new world is likely to take longer than our lifetimes. And in doing so, it's a consistent process of subverting and utilizing privilege towards the benefit of the purposefully marginalized, finding ways to seed power, not only take power and use it for your benefit, but to support the creation of agency for those that have and continue to be marginalized. And whether or not that means continue to say Black Lives Matter, whether or not that means holding spaces for people to do interesting and powerful, useful tech towards issues that for marginalized people, that affect marginalized people, by marginalized people. There are many different examples. I think the biggest thing to remember in doing that work is recognizing your own positionality, your own history in the work, and that one big tool, a collection of design activists said, if you're trying to do work, activist work, and you haven't been yelled at by another activist, you're probably doing something wrong. So those are some tidbits to jump on.
Okay, yeah.
I would love.
I definitely hear that. I want to jump into some of the questions in the chat. If we could try to get through a couple of these somewhat quickly. So Michelle Washington asking, do you work in the space of biophilia design with marginalized communities?
No, I should. One of my favorite quotes, I greatly appreciate communities that do and build and evolve, because that is a field that I am not conversant on. But one of my favorite quotes about ecological design in all of its forms was from I can't remember the professor, and I'd love to find it whenever she's available. She said that most designers that exist in the world have at best had maybe a freshman level biology course, meaning at its core, they are amateurs in understanding how the world works.
Oof.
Woo! Right? That's why I want to find it again. I can't remember. So I appreciate you coming after my ignorances.
And is this the Michelle? Is this Michelle Washington? Michelle Washington, designer Michelle. Okay, how you doing? Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much for coming.
Yes.
Next, the next question, and I'm really sorry if I mispronounce your name, Nedret. What are your thoughts on white folks wanting to enter equity design? What would you say to them? What advice would you give? And I know you just talked a little bit about allyship. So if you have anything to add to that for that particular question.
So certain communities that I've been a part of have different guiding principles and rules as to how people want to, quote unquote, enter the community. There are certain communities that are open to everybody engaging and supporting, whether you're white, whether you're cis, whether you're cishet, whether you are US, whichever privileges you experience. One asset that is very valuable is the Design Justice Network. If you pay your dues, you can have access to the Slack and learn about a litany of other communities and resources that have people always navigating the space. It's an international community. I just spoke with them a week or so ago. Find other people, learn about other spaces, learn the moderate to small amount of expertise from the books and the resources and the assets that people have put out in the world. Design Justice is a very valuable one. There are so many others that have been created very recently. And I can create some other lists over time as well. What advice would I give? Grapple with your privilege. Grapple with historical neoliberal economics, white supremacy, environments outside of design that better create an understanding of the inequities of the world on large and small scales. Learn about the limits of design. Learn about how you personally benefit from a design. I think one of the main ways that white supremacy is perpetuated in design is by the padding of portfolios, is by the representation of a litany of experiences, be it in the San Desert or a whole bunch of other experiences that I needed to have, that we all need to have to get in front of you to recognize that you care about what I'm talking about, that in so many situations, we control the narrative, we control the process, we control the outcomes that are developed, that the beneficiaries have rarely any opportunity to determine whether or not it was beneficial or not. So understanding when you are a designer, the privileges and the systems that exist that you play into to leverage colonialist, white supremacist, exploitative activities.
Okay. I want to move to the next question from Mike. So Mike says, commenting on the concepts of innovation and reflecting values, your idea of marginalized communities in these spaces, Mike's mind immediately jumped to San Francisco and Los Angeles, two cities affected with homelessness, yet full of technology and innovation. How can the community of designers come together to heal this? That's a great question, Mike.
It is a great question. I think it's important to recognize that at its core, design in its current form is inherently a technocratic institution. Technocratic meaning it's not technological, but meaning that in the way that it's utilized in a litany of spaces is devoid of politics, of power. It's separated from the communities that have been empowered or disempowered to create the system as it is today. And in doing so, that's one of the main reasons why, especially currently all across the African continent, litany of spaces, people emulate San Fran to recognize what it means to do technological innovation in its quote unquote positive ways and its negative ways. And recognizing that technology and innovation in so many ways are focusing on those simply are part of the problem without understanding how people try to wield power to get where they are, and how communities who are marginalized continue to be so. So the long story short is connect with people that are continuing to do the work. Figure out how you can help them, be it activists, be it politicians, be it community organizers in those spaces that can support, instead of simply creating another hackathon that goes nowhere.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And it looks like our last question is from Olivia. How do you describe the value of design and human-centered design to stakeholders in the work that you're currently doing in Botswana? What do they get excited about in that explanation? And what do you find hard to communicate about design in that space?
Woo! Let's go. So one difficulty about the Botswana economy, because so many of the issues of the communities that I consistently talk about are economic. There's an unemployment concern in this community. There's a glut of people coming out of colleges and the industry with certain trainings that the industry cannot subsume in the local community. There's just over 2 million people in a place that's about the size of roughly Texas. And so it's very sparse, and their main economy is very non-diversified. So many of the economic contributions, besides diamonds and tourism, actually come from South Africa, which is much more of a diversified economy. So there's a lot of communities that have made space and supported towards entrepreneurship, towards the Botswana Innovation Hub that's been constructed and trying to support activities of certain innovation activities. So in those spaces, things that help them strategize, evolve, and move to create their interventions are useful. The difficulty in those situations is making a valid argument for a type of design where the industry has not been institutionalized like it has in Western communities, in a way that then creates space for people to critique how innovation can be operationalized, not just in their economy, but in their politics and their work. That's one thing. Additionally, a lot of the political activities are very top-down. The government, because the diamond market is a parastatal, it's mainly owned by the government. The government, and a litany of other perspectives from that, the government holds a lot of power and economic sway on decisions that need to be made on massive and on individual levels. So if you're going to change anything, then you go to the main leverage of change, which is the government, which moves so slow, so very slow. So communicating how things need to transform when people say it needs to transform away from things that people have done in the past is very, very, very difficult. So those are some things.
All right, well, thank you so much. I don't see that we have any other questions in the chat at this time. But I just want to thank you for a really great presentation. I want to thank you for all of your knowledge that you've shared with us, all of your stories, your experiences. It's, you know, as designers, we always come with such cool backgrounds and life experiences that influence the ways that we think about and engage in design. So yes, as Sarah said, thank you for your wisdom. So yeah, thank you. And I want to thank all of you for coming to our second installation of Spotlight on Black Designers. This has been my baby, and Laura's been really instrumental helping us with all things School of Design Talks. And she's actually going to share a little bit now about just a quick blurb. We have a number of talks coming up for the rest of the academic year at DePaul. So I'll let Laura, I don't want to take that.
No worries. Thank you so much, Christina. And thank you so much, Pierce. That was such an amazing talk. And I won't take too much of everyone's time. I did want to share that a little bit of information on our upcoming talks. Our next talk will be with industrial designer Jasmine Kent. The talk is titled Taking Up Space. It'll be on March 8th, which is also International Women's Day. Time TBD. But most likely in the evening. I am copy pasting to the chat just one more time our social media handles and our DePaul School of Design Eventbrite page, where you can keep up with upcoming events. Jasmine Kent's talk will close our winter quarter, and I just wanted to share that in the spring quarter we'll have a series of events, including a talk with American artist Sharon Biswas, who's a game designer, and a panel at the end of the quarter on anti-oppression and resistance with women in the design field.
Last thing I wanted to say, if anybody has any questions that they wanted to ask or any other points they wanted to build, just to talk shop, or any other communities that they think need a particular type of expertise, email me at pierce@thinkrubix.com. Thank you very much.
Thank you.